Transitions have been described as a way of life. They've been described as a challenge of living. And I think we need to look at that, because maybe transitions are more than just the changes that children experience day to day. And we're talking here today about really young children and the kinds of experiences they might have, both in the care of their parents and in out-of-home care. Maybe in private nursery provision, maybe in state-maintained provision, maybe with daycare or childminding. So there's a whole range of options open to families with young children and for supporting families with young children. But those changes in children's lives will mean that they're not always in the home environment. They might be at a mother and toddler group, they might be at something at the church hall, they might be at something in the community, they may be in statutory provision. They may spend a full day there or part of a week. So we need to look at what that experience is like. Those kind of changes happen for all children. They're normative, if you like. But when you come to the smallest children, we have to tread with great care. I've suggested in some of my work that the way the first transitions are handled may have an impact all the way through as children travel through their educational experiences and on into adult life in terms of their capacity to cope with what's new, their sense of self-worth and confidence to meet whatever's around the corner and to be resilient in that process. And these are words that we kind of have to unpick. What do they mean? If we wonder what the qualities of a setting are when we're helping children make that transition away from their parents, and it is often away from their parents, although some placements will be with their mother or their father, then we need to think, what are the qualities in that setting that are going to be important? And there's no doubt that a sense of well-being, a sense of engagement in what's going on around them is really, really helpful for small children. They're, of course, intrinsically motivated to be companionable, to make contact with the adults around them. But if that's been interrupted for any reason, it may simply be with a move somewhere else, but it might be that the home experience has not been plain sailing for every family, and for all sorts of reasons. So if we're going to think about the well-being of children, we need to think what the ingredients of that might be. And first of all, I think companionship and companionable relationships, which comes from the work of Colwyn Trevarthen, are extremely important. But so too is the mirroring of how we view children, the respectfulness for children, the sense of the relationships that might manage to be continuous or passed across from the parent to the caregiver. So that relationship is going to be very, very important. When I think further about transitions, I think there are some key things that we need to pay attention to. One is the environment. Is it familiar? Is it sufficiently homely and welcoming and feel comfortable? Can there be things that belong to the child in that setting that they can bring with them and that they can take home again? It doesn't have to be anything very much. Some people call those things transitional objects. You might call them a teddy or a favourite toy or something belonging to the mum, a scarf, or maybe a set of keys, depending on the age of the child. So we have to think, what is it that helps the child feel the connection between their regular caregiver and the caregivers that become part of their lives if they go into out-of-home settings? We did some work some time ago, Colwyn Trevarthen, Helen Marwick, a number of other researchers, looking at the needs of children in out-of-home care. And we tried to specify, without being too much tied into stage theory, we tried to specify what a baby of 0 to 3 months might need, what a child from 3 months to 6 months, and so on, might need within the settings. And there are common things that go all the way through up until later early childhood, but there are some things that are unique at each stage. One of the common things is consistency of relationships. Another is the welcoming environment. Another might be what, when they're older, we call curriculum, but the kind of experiences we're offering children. And yet another will be the engagement that children feel. And that, along with well-being, thinking about engagement, I think makes us want to focus on what it is that the child, we can kind of put in place for children so that they feel a sense of their own agency. Now let me talk about that for a minute, because by agency I mean their power to act, their capacity to influence what's going on, their right to be heard if they use their wee voices. What does that mean? It may be being heard in a conversation, it may be the quality of the interaction that's really important, but it may be something really deeply rooted in terms of your own sense of self and self-worth and your emotional well-being. That if an adult is responsive to you in ways that are positive and warm, then you mirror that back in your early life, maybe towards other children, maybe just in that exchange within the relationship. So those are some of the things that I think matter enormously. And then we have to think what that means for what adults do. To be able to provide those things, we need to be able to think about how we know a child. We know children in general. I think many of us are really good on the theory about what happens as children move through their development. But do we know that in relation to the particular child? And I think we do in Scotland think about the child at the centre, the importance of the individual child and the child as part of their community. That community in a baby room or with a childminder is a different community than in your own house. For some children, it might be the positive thread in their lives. For others, it might be really tricky letting your mum go when, after 10 months of maternity leave, if they've had that luxury, they're going back to full-time work. What does that feel like? The person who's been there for you all the time. Whatever the quality of that relationship, that's your consistent figure. Can that person hand the features of those relationships over to another adult? And what does that take on the part of the caregiver and on the part of the parent? And that's so often, when we say parent, we mean mother. And I think babies and mothers are absolutely wired to each other. But I've also worked in situations where it's the father who's the main caregiver. And again, that passing over of the relationship will be very, very important. Also, babies have relationships with other people than their mother and father. They may have siblings at home. They may have an adoring gran. How do those relationships move into the workplace, as it were? What is our workplace? What it might be their haven? And so I think we need to think, how does that work? What is it that, as a practitioner, I need to do? But I've also found myself thinking increasingly about that role of the wider family, and maybe because I'm now a granny. And I think that's a legitimate professional thing to talk about. Just as Carmen Daly, in her work with very young children and their families and caregivers, talks about the building of relationships between children and between mothers and carers, she says that it's quite legitimate professionally to think about love as well as companionship, to think about warmth. And it's maybe a different quality in the professional than it is in the parent. But just because a child isn't at home doesn't mean the cuddle should stop, the physical contact should stop. We just have to have our own standards for that kind of care and importantly, to observe them consistently right through the professional group. Because the handovers won't just be from the parent to the carer, but between carers. If we're going to staff establishments for 52 weeks of the year, then any given child is not always going to have the same key worker available to them. So we probably need partnerships within teams so that two, at least, of the early childhood workers know the children extremely well. And I think that derives from listening, observing, thinking about what you're seeing, not taking the immediate answer for what that behaviour is, but thinking a little bit more deeply. For the child who can't yet communicate verbally, what's their behaviour telling us? Classically, tired, dirty nappy, hungry. But it might be something else as well, so we need to know each child really well.